Welcome to the Real People, Real Business Show. My name is Stephanie Hayes, and I'm a business strategist who helps experienced business owners design asset-based business models that set them up for growth and exit. I love to speak with like-minded entrepreneurs to share their real stories and the gritty details of how they've navigated their own way through. On this show, you won't hear about the glamorized entrepreneurship journeys that you see online, and you won't be told how to make six figures in 6 weeks. Instead, you can expect to hear real, vulnerable, and inspiring stories that you can relate to that have helped create the foundation for each of our guests' businesses. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Cleoniki Kesidis. Cleoniki is a copywriter and brand storyteller who helps solo entrepreneurs and small businesses connect with their audience on an emotional level and has developed brand platforms for large international brands, coaches, startups, and more. An education in biology and computer science taught Cleoniki precision and analysis, which has helped her approach copywriting analytically, investigating problems, and applying the most effective solutions. Welcome to the show, and thanks so much for taking the time to share your story today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So tell me a little bit more about this background. I'm intrigued by it. So you started in biological sciences and in a very scientific career rooted in data and analysis, and you ended up in a very creative field.
Yeah, so I actually started out as a software engineer and worked as a software engineer for a couple years there, doing legacy code and C, the whole thing. And I decided that that wasn't really for me. I didn't love that. I moved into biology and did a master's. So a lot of research, a lot of data, a lot of analysis. And there was a lot that I loved, that I enjoyed about both those careers. And I found that what I was really enjoying was the process of figuring out how stuff works and how to communicate that. So I really, really loved presenting to people and sharing information and just figuring out how to communicate these more complicated processes. And I'd always loved writing, so I was doing some freelance writing. And then the pandemic hit around the time that I'd finished my master's. And so it just felt like a good time to jump into freelance writing and copywriting in specifically. So yeah, that's how I got there. And I find that in copywriting, it's really a lot of the same thing that I really enjoy, is that figuring out how stuff works, really digging into these details and figuring out exactly what's going on, and then how to communicate that in a way that's really simple and clear.
Yeah, it's that perfect marriage of science and analytics and creativity. And I've had a lot of copywriters that have been my clients, and I know that it's very much like the creative side comes after you've gone through and been very analytical about the work that you're doing. And so I think that a lot of people start out in these creative fields and they think, oh, I'm just a good writer, and so therefore I'm just going to write well. But as you know, there's a whole lot more to it. So can you talk a little bit about what you've discovered about working with clients and how you marry those two sides of the business?
Yeah, I mean, writing is such a small part of the business, really. It's such a small percentage of what you're doing, because so much of it is about that information gathering and really figuring out what it is. And I do think that that's really key to communication in general, really. It's the whole, the quote about how I didn't have time to write something short, so I wrote something long. I always forget which author wrote that, but it's basically the idea that if you want to communicate well and clearly and be concise, that is so much more work goes into just that idea and that processing and planning your message, basically.
Yeah, I own a software company, and when we first built the solution that that's our core product, a lot of people really perceive this type of solution as something very straightforward and very simple. And what we really discovered was that it's actually really complex to make something simple.
Yes, it's very, very true.
And so tell me a little bit about how you got started. So who were your first clients? How did you find them? How did you bridge that gap that everybody seems to, be concerned about, which is, I want to work with clients and they want to see evidence of the work that I've done, but I'm just starting out and I know I can do it. So tell me a little bit about that part of the journey.
Yeah. So that's for sure one of the hardest parts when you're starting out, of course, is those first couple clients. For me, one big thing that really helped is I took a course, and I'd actually been doing a lot of freelance writing very casually for a couple hours a week, maybe for a couple years at that point, while doing other stuff during the day. And it was very random. I didn't really know what to do next. And there is, of course, a ton of free information out there, obviously, but I found that when I looked at free information, like just reading blog posts and researching on Google, there's so much contradictory stuff. There's so many different people just saying all these different things, and it's so overwhelming and chaotic. So what made the difference for me and really got me from being someone who's writing a couple hours here and there to someone who's doing this full time and supporting my daughter doing it too. What got me there was sitting down and paying for a course and following a system. And that really made such a big difference. And then from there, getting those first clients was really all about relationships. And I still think that that's a huge part of my business and getting clients, and really something that I think partially has maybe been lost in some industries is just the importance of having those relationships. And I know that, social media is of course huge and of course very important to a lot of businesses, but I think sometimes people, especially when they're starting out, can be distracted by the social media and the blogging and all of those things, as opposed to the importance of really talking to people, building a network, pulling on your network, and having those human interactions.
I'm so glad that you said that, because it's my lifelong mission and battle to help people understand that they can't get away with kind of lazy marketing, right? And then, I think a lot of people get attracted to the idea of social media because they think they can just do everything from behind their computer, and it's increasingly less the case as there's more and more saturation.
Absolutely.
And Instagram 10 years ago was a very different world than Instagram now, and it's almost become irrelevant to building a business. So all that social media does is give you a platform on which to publish your content so that when people find you, they're able to get to know you.
Right.
But the relationship building, and that's the funny thing, is like, it's actually the easiest form of marketing, but
and the most
everybody,
fun.
nobody wants to do it. Everyone wants to so tell me a little bit more about how you've built that. Like, have you systematized your relationship building, and where do you focus those efforts?
Yeah. So I have systematized it. It's pretty simple. It's just on a Trello board where I keep track of different people I've met and sort of where that relationship is. And basically I work at meeting new people, of course, and I usually do that often through networking events, but also just connecting with people on social media is a great way to connect with people if you try that, and different places like that to bring people, just meet new people. And then from there, what I try to do is to just keep in touch with people regularly. And I actually track it, which feels it could feel a little bit fake, but I don't think it is fake. It's just making sure I don't want to forget anybody or have someone who was a really great connection who I really enjoyed talking to. It's awful when you're like, oh, I haven't spoken to them in a year. Oh, shoot, I really liked them. So I do keep track of the people who I did feel like we had a good connection and could be a great potential client or a partner or just someone that I'm really enjoying talking to and learning from and connecting with, and make sure that I reach out regularly and we just keep in touch and follow each other on social media, keep reaching out, keep suggesting things, try to be valuable and helpful to them. Obviously, that's something, there's limits to how much that can scale, of course, and you wouldn't want to be spending, an enormous amount of time just checking in on people. But I do think it's important to identify those valuable relationships and then to prioritize them. Because if that's a priority, it should be on your to-do list. It should be something that you're keeping track of and making sure that person doesn't just slip away.
But that's a fallacy, isn't it? That we have to have marketing systems that scale, that we have to have businesses that scale, right? This prevailing wisdom that successful business is one that scales. I mean, what if you don't want that? Right? What if you're perfectly happy being a personal brand and a service provider, and you need 5 clients?
Yeah.
Why do we need to build systems that scale?
Yeah, for me, definitely. I mean, I have a toddler, and it's, I don't work 40 hours a week. That's I don't know how people can work that long with a toddler. There's always another disaster, There's
You don't work with a toddler at all.
Yeah. So I really like that I'm able to make that decision as a business owner. It's one of, I think, the best parts of being a business owner is that you can say, I don't have to be working more and more hours and taking on more and more clients, and I can advance and feel, growing my business can be growth in a different way. It's nice that getting to the point where I can book clients further in advance, or getting to the point where, there's more reliably, or I'm able to choose my favorite clients a little bit more, and really pick projects I'm super passionate about, as opposed to feeling like I need to just pile on more and more and more and more.
Yeah. And are you finding yourself sort of falling into any sort of specialization or any sort of focus as you grow?
That's honestly something that I'm a little bit torn about, to be completely honest, because there are, of course, things that I particularly like. I really love working with tech and sciences, because I do have that background. So I really love those sort of interesting, startups with really interesting innovations and just all the cool stuff that's going on, of course, in tech these days. And my favorite projects are often things I like: websites, I like branding. But at the same time, I think that if I had all, a host of 5 or 10 clients that were all that would be boring. So I also really enjoy having that variety. And I think that the fun of learning something new, I think, is really what makes being a service provider so great to me, is being able to really connect with people one-on-one and learn about this business that they created, which is so unique. And there's so many different things out there. I mean, I've run into so many businesses, or stumbled upon clients that are doing stuff that, I wouldn't even have realized that existed. It's like, what even is this? But I absolutely love getting to dig into that stuff. So no, I don't think I'll ever get to the point where I'm very, very specialized in a super, super specific niche, because while I do have stuff I enjoy and seek out, I really love having those just surprises and the interesting curveballs.
I did a consulting project once with a pallet company. And it's one of those things, like, it's a huge business and they make tons of money just tracking pallets. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
would never have even known that that's a thing. Like, you
Yeah.
see wooden pallets sitting at the side of the road in somebody's house or something like that. Those things are worth a lot of money, and organizations who use them a lot in like a shipping or logistics capacity, they want to know where all their pallets are, because
Sure.
they're a huge cost of their business. So this company had created a whole like technology around tracking pallets.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's stuff like that that's
Wow.
just so cool. It's cool to see how the world works, you just learn something new about how the stuff you take for granted.
Right. And how the money flows
Hmm.
in different places. Right.
Hmm.
So tell me, so there's some aspect of creativity that needs to exist for you, obviously, as a
Yeah,
writer. They
of
know
course.
that like the analytical mind will take you so far. But, was this something that was there already? Was this something that you learned? Tell me more about that side of the business.
Yeah, yeah. So the creativity is definitely, I mean, that's something that I think philosophy and science can't answer yet exactly how we do that. And it's something I've definitely always loved writing and loved creativity in lots of different forms. So I think that is there as far as talent, or whatever that means, as far as innate ability. Though I do think that many people who don't consider themselves creative really could be, or are, if they, found the right way to express it, to access it. I think that the creativity from combining that with a business side is very interesting, because creativity is something you can't necessarily control, even if it's your own brain. So that's, I think, something that's interesting to balance when you are creative in business, is how do you have, business, which of course you're meant to have things, there's deadlines, there's meetings, there's schedules, with this creativity, which you really can't necessarily call up on demand or make it work at all the time, 8 hours a day.
Yeah, that's the age old problem, right? With creativity as a business offering, right? Like, how do
Mhm.
you trigger that on? And I know some of my creative friends, just like, it is a struggle. It's a struggle for them, right? Because
Yeah.
they're like, I need to produce this thing by this
Hmm.
time. And yet here I am, just completely blocked, or,
Hmm.
the energy isn't there today or whatever. And those are real things. You don't just get to flip a switch and
Exactly.
be creative, right? So how have you kind of worked through that, and how have you sort of been able to keep that business side of a very creative skill?
Yeah. So one thing I think definitely is you really have to take burnout seriously. And I know it can sometimes feel a little cliche, like you see a lot of people talking about burnout these days, but you really have to take it seriously and consider it, as a business owner from a business perspective, that this is like a very big risk and you need to be careful about burnout. You need to know what the signs are for yourself. You need to be alert to that, and you need to take action to help when you feel that you are burning out, which is hard. And that definitely was something that those first couple years in business was very, definitely a struggle to learn and to realize that this isn't something where you can just sort of shrug it off. You need to take it seriously when you start getting those signals that like my brain is turning into applesauce. Like it's something you need to react to. I think another thing that helps me a lot is really working. I like to think of the writing and the creative process in two steps. So the step of just getting words on the page, I like to use like the sandbox metaphor. It's like putting sand in the sandbox, and then the step of shaping it into something that's great. So, building the sand into a sandcastle. And I think every time if I'm feeling really stuck, it can help to remind myself like, okay, this is the step where I'm just putting sand in the sandbox, and it doesn't have to look good. Because I do think that a lot of times with creativity, it's that perfectionism or that part of us that feels like we should be able to write it right the first time or in one go or in one draft, which is just not true. Like that's just not how writing works.
One of my best friends is a graphic designer, and she's, we're both around 50. And so she's been at it for a long time, and we've been working together for many, many years. And she's at the point now where she goes, you know what? I'm giving you like a shitty first draft because it makes such a difference for someone to have something to respond to, right? To react to. She's like, I don't care whether they like it or they don't like it, because I know it's just like, getting some stuff on a page so that they can say, oh, I like this thing about this and that thing about that.
Exactly.
And so then we can kind of move on from there. And that's the way she approaches all of her work. And she doesn't get herself like crippled or paralyzed around whether it's perfect or it's not, right? And I think that that's a pretty unique approach with a lot of creatives who instead get really bent out of shape about whether it's perfect or whether it's not perfect.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. I know that one of my mentors was saying at one point that aim for like B+, because I think that there are a lot of us who are A+ kind of people, and we want that A+, and we want every single thing we make to be A+. And of course you want your final result to be A+, but that first draft, that first shot, like aim for B+, like just do something that's pretty close and it's okay. And then you're going to come back and you're going to get feedback and you're going to, iterate and edit. And that's how you're going to get it to the A+. You can't pound out an A+ when you, sit there and type it in one shot.
So how do you, what do you say to people who, like, I know very experienced copywriters who will still just agonize over the first thing that goes to a client, even though they know it's like meant to be that sort of shitty first draft, right? So, I mean, it's not gonna be the shitty first draft. It's gonna be like the good place to start first draft.
Yes.
So what's your advice to sort of moving through that agonizing kind of judgment, because it is a little bit of a culmination of you, and creative work's really hard because it's so open to interpretation.
I think one thing that I've found is that that's basically, it's a question about perfectionism, right? It's that fight against the need to have every single thing be perfect. And obviously there's a lot to say about perfectionism, but I think that one thing that helps is when you start releasing that and you start, sending stuff to clients just to get feedback and be like, look, this isn't perfect, but like, let's chat about it. You'll often find that people don't react horribly the way you might be fearing or imagining they're going to. They're like, oh, you had a typo in there. This is garbage. People don't do that. And often the things that us as, if you're an expert in your field, of course, the things that you might notice or bother you, a client might not even notice. So I think that once you start releasing that and you start just trying and experimenting and letting yourself sort of do that, quote, shitty first draft, even though of course it's not going to be that shitty, you do start to find that like, the sky doesn't fall. and that it brings that so much value to have client input earlier. It's more efficient, honestly. I mean, how frustrating is it to work so hard to perfect something and then be like, oh no, that's not what we wanted. We want something completely different. I mean, of course, that's so frustrating. And I think it doesn't go as badly as you think it's going to go. It's a sort of thing like, try it, it's going to be okay. And it can bring benefits. I mean, getting more collaboration and more back and forth, it's only going to make your work stronger when you think of it as something you're doing collaboratively versus something that has to be sort of perfect and is a little bit untouchable.
In my experience, client reactions can come from so much more than just what the words on the page are.
Mm.
Like if your client is just in a position, like this is why a lot of my copywriting clients will actually send people over to me first, because if that client really doesn't know their own business or is really like stuck
Mm.
waffling or whatever, nothing you can produce for them is going to feel right because they're
Mhm.
still conflicted about what they're trying to do from a strategic perspective. So I think there's
Absolutely.
so much more that can be surfaced with, that first draft that is going to give you really good information really quickly about, where your
Mhm.
clients at and, what they're thinking and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. I do feel that copywriting is one of those things that's a little bit of a tip of the iceberg sort of service where people think, okay, I need a copywriter. Like, okay, yeah, I need this written. And you start talking, or I'll start talking to clients and it's like, well, no, you kind of need you need a whole strategy here. Like there's all this stuff underneath this where you thought, okay, we'll just write it. And like, no, you need a brand like message, you need a story, you need to like nail down your offer, you need to figure out who your audience is. It's a sort of thing where like you sort of open up the box and go, okay, there's a lot more in here.
Yeah, without that stuff, investing in creative work is actually like a total waste of money, right? And there's no way that you can be successful in the work that you're doing if that client doesn't know
Absolutely.
their own business first, right?
Absolutely. And it makes such a difference when you're talking to someone who knows that stuff. And once we have it, and I do work with clients a little bit to do that sort of brand story. That's also part of what I do in getting that story, that messaging, like how are we going to communicate overall beyond just how are we writing this one page or this one ad. And it makes such a difference once someone does have that nailed down and they understand it and they know how they're communicating. It's just enormous to see how much everything gets so much easier. Like the writing just flows out. It's so much easier.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about how your services have evolved over the course of the last couple of years.
Yeah, so the evolution is a lot of because what we've just been talking about, that I had so many clients who would come for copywriting, which I was starting when I began. I was offering, very strictly writing up, you send me a brief and I'll write it up. And so many people didn't have that brief, they didn't have the information they needed to explain exactly what they wanted, or they had some of the information, but it just wasn't fully formed yet. And I found that to do the writing, my process was basically becoming that I would figure out the brand messages, figure out the audience. Like I'd basically be doing that as like a background step to the copywriting, as like a prereq sort of under the table almost. So I've been shifting more and more to be focusing on those services because I do think that that's 90% of the project. And then once you have that and you know exactly what's my message, who am I talking to, what am I doing, the copywriting is so easy. The copywriting just, it writes itself because you know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, that's that whole like data and analytics piece. The best copywriters I know, they're great writers, but it's not because they're great writers
Mm.
that they have had the kind of success that they've had. It's because they do all this pre-work. Like they do more pre-work than
Mhm.
anyone I've ever met from all the way from whether it's a formal sort of brand guidelines, like that's part of
Mhm.
their process now, and that's non-negotiable, or this like very extensive research and
Mhm.
orientation kind of exercise. And then the ones who just kind of take a brief and write are the ones who, they don't write copy that is mind blowing. And they're all good
Exactly.
writers,
Exactly.
but being able to connect to and build like a unique message really comes from sort of the data side, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It comes from that knowledge.
Yeah.
You have to have that knowledge. And I mean, from a business, like, from the perspective of the business owner, the client, you have to have spoken to your audience, you have to know what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And What exactly do they want and how do they say it in their own words, and all these sorts of questions. I think so much of business in general is just about research and about figuring people out. And it's another reason that I love building a business that is around relationships and networking and connecting with people, because the closer you are to those people and to the people you're working with and serving, just the stronger and the better your business is going to be.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, everything is about people and relationships and
Mhm.
knowing people and relationships. I've recently gotten more involved in a certain industry, and the conversations I can have with the people in that industry are so much more focused and targeted because it's like about a thing.
Mhm.
And those business owners that you're working with, I imagine like that's their life. They're so immersed in a thing. And here we are kind of going, we're looking at all sorts of different businesses. So it's really hard for us to, I think it's really hard to build something and communicate something when you're not really like well immersed in the
Mhm.
business and the industry, and at least from a cursory perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And then how have you seen your clients evolve? Like, have you seen, if you think about some of the first folks that you worked for versus who you're working for now, has there been a journey there as well?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think a lot of that is just building confidence, which is something that when you are, starting up a new business or a new industry, or venturing out on something new, so much of it is about building that confidence internally and figuring out, what you're worth and what you want to do and who you want to talk to. So yeah, I definitely think that as I've gotten more skilled, more confident, and figure out exactly what I want in my business, I'm getting better and better at connecting with the people who are right for me, who are the clients that are going to be, giving projects that I enjoy and people I enjoy working with. I know that at the beginning, I had a few clients that were, sort of frustrating or kind of grated on me. And I have noticed that as time's gone by, and that just happens less and less and less. And I think it's because I am leaning into really getting to know people, really being authentic myself and being confident in, my business and who I am and what I'm doing. And that just means that I'm working more and more with people who I genuinely enjoy talking to and being with, and generally, genuinely care about them and their business, which makes everything obviously so much more enjoyable and more successful for everybody.
I think that comes back to what you were describing early on was, with your approach to, making new relationships and nurturing
Mhm.
those relationships is that, you're showing up pretty genuinely, pretty, accurately as yourself. And I think that
Mhm.
that calls in your people. And I
Mhm.
know I'm the same way. Like I found myself at the end of my coaching practice really surrounded by people that are really my people, who
Mhm.
they had gotten to know me well enough that we could share the same humor. We could, we had the same outlook. And I think you teach
Mhm.
people how to treat you too. And that's probably something that evolves as a business owner as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's something too. I know a lot of business owners struggle with the fear of sort of pushing anyone away, right? Like cutting
Yeah.
anyone out of their audience,
Yeah.
which can be, and it comes up all the time in copywriting where someone's like, no, I want to talk to everybody. Like, I don't want to narrow this down. I don't want to use like a weird tone of, not a weird, like unusual tone of voice or unusual kind of humor, or anything like that, that might alienate somebody. And I think it's so important to realize, and so true, that the more you're willing to be authentic and the more you're willing to, yeah, use a tone of voice that stands out a little bit, or you don't want to overshare your personal life, of course, but be authentic and be personal and connect with people and do stuff a little differently. Yeah, I guess technically you're going to be pushing people away, but you're going to be drawing in the people that you really want to be working with, and you don't need to be scared of pushing away, this imaginary other audience.
But those new people are going to be so much more bought into the idea of
Mhm.
aligning themselves with you because they see themselves in you and because they know that you're their people. So you have a
Mhm.
much stronger relationship with those very likely repeat clients, right?
Exactly, yeah, especially as a service provider. I mean, that relationship and the repeat clients is what you want, right? You want this to be a long-term thing.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think definitely learning to not be scared of, pushing anyone away, or shutting people out, and letting that scare you into being really general and really generic and a little fake.
Do you think that people need to, like, their writing needs to be very similar to how they are as people. And I'll tell you why I asked this, because I'm curious about it. In person, I am very like humor driven, very
Mm.
sarcastic, very funny. People know me as a funny person. But when I write for my business, it's a very different style of writing. And it wouldn't work for me. It wouldn't uphold my brand. It just doesn't come out where
Mhm.
I'm sarcastic and funny and goofy and whatever in my writing. And I remember somebody saying to me once, I've known you for so many years and your writing is really good, but it's not you, it's not your personality, how you are in real
Interesting.
life. And I thought, but it never will be. Like, that's not my tone, and that's not how my approach to business. And it's not like I'm dry and boring in my writing, but it tends to be a little bit more serious, and it tends to be a little bit more inspirational. And it tends to be like, listen, this is my work and I'm taking it seriously and I'm an
Mhm.
expert in what I'm talking about. And if I just end up zany and goofy and whatever, then I'm building a brand that doesn't feel really authentic to me.
Yeah, I definitely, that is something I see a lot too, especially for personal brands or solopreneurs, very small businesses, or people will be saying, you should write the way you talk, you should write, really, really be yourself. And I do think that it's okay to keep that line between yourself and your business, even when you are a very small business or a personal brand. And I think that, there are issues, again, coming back to burnout, of people who really make their business their whole life and let it suck
Mhm.
up their whole life and their whole self, and it's everything. And that can be like that can be dangerous. I mean, you're going to burn out. Like that is going to lead to problems sooner or later. So I think it is important and valuable to have that line between who you are, with your friends, like with your family, and who your business is, even if it's very, very close to you. So yeah, I do think it's completely fine to have your business voice be tailored for your business, as it should be. It should be tailored for your audience and what you're trying to present, versus just tailored to you. At the same time, though, I do think that people can lean too much towards that side and come off sounding too generic. I think we all, can point to entire industries where every single website is like, they could
Yeah.
all be written by the same person. Like the whole industry's decided they use the same tone. We're seeing that in tech a little bit with this particular like brand of humor, where everyone, like all these startups, have the same sort of brand of humor. So I think that you don't have to necessarily, pour your heart out on your sleeve and be, share your complete self through your business. But I think it is important to look around at what people are doing and to do something different. Like be willing to do something a little different, to sound different, to shake things up.
Yeah, what comes to mind are these sort of like, personal brand people who,
Hmm.
saw someone like Asha Amberger sort of crawl up the ladder very early on. She was OG in our space, and she's actually a friend of mine. And she had lots of sweary bits, but she was an excellent writer. And she was an excellent writer. She also had this little sort of rebel tendency. If you know her in person in real life, she's feisty, but she's not like, rah rebel, but she's smart. And I think a lot of people tried to follow that sort of, and so
Hmm.
they would write, like they would swear in all their copy. And like I swear a lot. I swear a lot as a human being, as an individual, but I don't swear in my business copy, because it's just not who I am as a business person.
Hmm.
I get up and I talk about business, and I'm going to talk about business, and I'm going to be professional, and I'm going to be, inspiring, and I'm going to be emotional and that sort of thing. But it's just not like, I'm not getting up there using like F bombs at everything. So I think there's like that, there was sort of that trend. And so I think like what the point that we're sort of trying to make is that you want to appeal to your audience, but not in a way that it doesn't feel authentic, right? That doesn't
Hmm.
feel like you, and that really does represent the brand that you want to sort of portray, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think it does come back to that. People are looking for something that's a little bit easier, like maybe it's almost like that sort of automating process of, you just sort of adopt the tone that's a little bit dominant in your industry, or that you've seen other successful people using. And it's almost like an escape from developing that really authentic tone yourself, right? Which of course is very challenging. And that's definitely something I see a lot in copywriting projects too, where you ask someone, like, what's your business tone? Like how, what is your tone of voice guide? And a lot of businesses aren't really sure. And I find that if you're not sure about that, it's so easy to just slide into something where you're kind of copying everybody else, or you're kind of just, a little bit wishy-washy, versus it can be so beneficial to really put in the time and the energy to think about, what tone do I want to have? Like, think about it strategically. What is your audience looking for? What are your competitors doing? What tone is going to be authentic to you, is going to ring true to your audience, and it's going to be, a little bit different than what the other people out there are doing. And think about that strategically, and codify it, get it out there, and know what your tone is.
Okay, I've got a really prickly question for you because I have to ask. So of course we have, cognitive technologies that are, arising. And I find it interesting to sit back and watch all of the pearl clutching and the hand wringing about, the protest about how these cognitive technologies are gonna, rid the world of all creative skill and thought. And the copywriters are the ones who are, standing up and saying, this is going to completely destroy my business. So I have opinions, but I would love to hear yours.
Well, I'm definitely curious what your opinions are too. Yeah, I mean, I've been using the AI tools, the chat bots for sure, experimenting with them. I found that they have their uses. I'm not going to be like, oh, they're horrible. I've definitely found them useful for some things. I have not found them to output anything that's final draft ready, getting back to that like shitty first draft kind of thing. They can sometimes get you to a shitty first draft sometimes. But I find that it comes back to what we were saying before about how the actual writing is not the work of copywriting. So yeah, they can write stuff, but the actual work that you need to do to get something good is all about that coming up with the idea, processing the data, figuring out, what does your message need to be, like from a strategic point, right? Not like what words go in what order, but what is the message? And getting all of that down, figuring out all of that strategy, what sections should be on this landing page and in what order, and what are people could be thinking about, and what's their major pain point, all of that. And then you do the writing, and the writing is a small percent of the work. And sure, there are some cases where using the AI tools can be helpful. Like I said, I haven't found any to output anything that's good enough that I would send it.
I think you have to look at these cognitive technologies and that are in a creative space, and you have to say, how do I define what's creative work? All writing is not creative work, right? And so if I'm hammering out blog posts for the purposes of building up my SEO, or just filling in gaps on a site, or articles, or product descriptions or something like that, there's no real creative work in that work. It's not particularly it requires somebody to have those creative skills. That's more like collecting data and presenting it in a way that's somehow cohesive. So in a sense, those cognitive technologies are really, really great. I know I use them in my work all the time, right? And they're fantastic for getting ideas started. I think they're more of a thinking tool than they are an output tool. But yeah, they're never going to be, unless you get really, really good at writing prompts. And that's a skill set in itself, right? That's a creative skill in itself. Total other side, conversation around Midjourney and artists.
Yeah, of course.
Midjourney. Yeah. My same best friend who's a graphic designer has really dove into the AI, the Midjourney world. And what she's getting really good at is creating prompts to produce art that is stunning. And I've tried it. I'm shitty at it. I can't produce anything wonderful. So there's this whole other skill set that's going to develop on the creative side, and you're creating something new that is just developed in different ways. But on the writing side, I really believe, because of what you've just described around the process and how important the process is, that these would become handy tools for cranking out stuff that none of us, it's designers and logos, nobody wants to make logos. So on the writing side, whatever the equivalent of that is, they're going to be really I think they're great idea starters. I think they're great ways to get past that sort of initiation anxiety. But I think the trauma and the panic and the the lobbying and all of the the pearl clutching around these technologies killing creativity is just false. It's creating new economies for creativity.
Absolutely. If anything, it makes it faster and more efficient. Once, in the right places, if you know how to use it. Yeah, you just get your job done faster. I found that I'm using it mostly for the sort of fleshing out stage, especially
Mm.
when I am writing content of I'll sort of do out that strategic outline, what do we want to say? And then it can take that outline to a full blog, like that. And then you go through and you polish and you edit and you make it exact, perfect. Yeah, and it just makes stuff so much faster. It's great. It's like, okay, I can write a blog in, half the time or a third the time. That's great.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people that need to hear that. All right. There's one question I ask all my guests, and I would love to hear your perspective on it. What's the difference between what we sort of hear in the online business world or the business world in general? What's the difference between that and what's real about being a business owner?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that for me, what's different about what the perceived and the real is just how possible it is. And I know that, a lot of us listening are already business owners, so we know that already. But I think a lot of people who are outside the business or entrepreneurial world don't realize just how very possible it is. And I do think that part of that is because of the way we often present and talk about our businesses, where of course we're trying to present ourselves as experts and professionals and all of that. Of course you are, nothing wrong with that. But I think from the outside it can give this idea that you have to like already be an expert and you have to be like super professional and have all these credentials and be like really, really something to be able to start a business. And what I've found is you can absolutely just start and figure stuff out and learn what you need to learn and start getting out there. And all of us have skills that other people need and that often are things that we take for granted. So yeah, I think that the way we talk about business makes it look a lot more challenging than, of course it's challenging, but make it look harder to get into than it actually is.
Listen, I immersed myself into a new industry in January. Like,
Yeah.
no background in it whatsoever, no idea. Like, I worked with a couple of clients in the industry, but totally brand new industry. And I've already gotten to the point where the number one platform in the industry is asking me to be like the face of their
Oh,
live
wow,
stuff and everything like
congrats.
that. Because
Yeah.
you just have to like immerse yourself, right?
Yeah,
All of this is possible
it's so
if
possible.
you just become a student, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
For
Okay.
sure.
I love that. Okay. We're coming up on the end of the interview. I've loved having you here. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, so I have a website. My business name is CEK Copywriting. So you can check that out, cekkcopywriting.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out on social media and happy to connect with anybody and chat.
Awesome. Well, we'll put all of your links in the show notes so that people can find you and carry on the conversation. And I definitely appreciate everything that we've touched on today. So we're going to wrap it up. I'm so happy that we had the opportunity to chat with Cleoniki today to hear more about how her business came to be, her experiences along the way, and what the future of the business entails. And thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Real People, Real Business Show, where we get the real entrepreneurial stories and journeys that you can relate to. The show notes, resources, and links from this episode are available on my website and social media platforms. If you've enjoyed today's content, I would love for you to give us a review on whatever platform you're on to help us share these genuine stories with an even bigger audience. Until next time, keep building, keep dreaming, and keep being real.